This is my Autoboy telly, otherwise known as the Sure-Shot telly or Top Twin depending on what region you're in, thanks to Canon's nonsensical naming scheme when it comes to consumer cameras. It's a lovely little camera and it's the only point-and-shoot camera that I own. Made in 1986, it's one of the earlier cameras from Canon's Autoboy series, known in other regions as the Sure-Shot or Prima series, which were produced from 1979 through to 2005. And from my experience, I found the Autoboy cameras to be perfectly reasonable point-and-shoots. They're definitely not the best out there, but I think they deserve more credit. And if you're looking around to buy a point and shoot, I think it'd be silly to overlook one of these cameras. Of course, in this video, I'm specifically focusing on just one of the 45 different Autoboy cameras that Canon made. After all, this is a review of my camera. But from what I've gathered through using other Autoboy cameras and through Googling around, a lot of the broad strokes of this camera apply to most, if not all, of the Autoboy series cameras in terms of optical quality and shooting experience. Which, when you think about it, those are really the only factors that matter in a point-and-shoot camera. I bought it on a trip to Japan just over 2 years ago now because I was there and I felt like shooting some film and I didn't have a film shooting camera with me. So following a recommendation from a friend, I made my way to a tiny secondhand camera store in Shinjuku, where after browsing their assortment of cameras, I was eventually enticed by this one because it's a Canon and I'm a Canon fanboy. The price was also pretty good, but probably more relevant to this video, I was also very excited about the whole idea of having a twin lens point and shoot camera. So obviously I bought it, and as I was leaving the store, the lovely people who attended me recommended that I visit the top of a nearby skyscraper to see an incredible view of the city and to begin shooting my first roll. With that first roll, I really had no idea what to expect from the camera, let alone the film that I was shooting. Bear in mind, this was right at the start of my film shooting journey, so I was positively clueless. But luckily, I was at least aware of my cluelessness, so I approached that first roll very much as a test roll. This time of the day has worked out to be probably the best time of the day to do a test roll, because I've had direct sunlight, I've had golden sunlight, and now I've got this very soft, indirect post-sunset sunlight. I used every feature of the camera, and I shot and got those images developed and scanned as quickly as possible. And I got them back on a CD. It turns out that my Japanese isn't really that great. I really struggled to communicate with the people in the lab, and because of that, I ended up with a CD with photos on it. From that first roll, I did notice two quirks with this camera that aren't really that big of a deal, but are still important to mention, important to know. First up is the bokeh. It's kind of diamond shaped. It's not at all regular. It's very different. Some people may dislike it, some people like it. I personally quite like the diamond-shaped bokeh. I think it adds to the character. And secondly, you can end up with some weird lens flares because of the hood that effectively surrounds the lens. And yeah, it's not a fun lens flare. It was my first time shooting with an automatically advancing and rewinding camera, and at the time that felt very high-tech, very futuristic to me, which is weird because this camera is a camera from the late 80s and it felt high-tech to me in the late 2010s. But yeah, that general automaticness of this Autoboy makes it really easy to shoot with. These types of cameras really ask to be shot casually, which make them perfect for traveling where you just want to capture what's in front of you and you don't really want to think about what you're shooting. As you'd expect with a point and shoot, you just point and shoot and hope for the best. Now, I called this a little camera at the start of the video, which by all means it is, but for a point and shoot, it's actually quite a bit chunky. It's not exactly pocketable, or at least you wouldn't want to put it in your pocket. And the reason for that chunkiness is the twin lens feature, which gives you an f2.8 40mm or an f4.9 70mm lens, which you can switch through very easily just by sliding this across. And when you do, not only does it adjust the lens, but it also changes the perspective of the viewfinder, which makes shooting very easy and it's very natural. Now, as for the sound that it makes, that seems to be a point of contention amongst my friends. Personally, I quite like it, and half of my friends like it, but the other half, well...
That's so unsatisfying.
Taking a closer look at the camera, we can see all of its features, which are quite simple, of course, being a point and shoot. On the rear side, we have the flash control settings on auto or off, pretty standard, but still I'm grateful for the manual control. The aforementioned zoom switch, as well as quartz state settings, which are in Japanese for my camera, but that doesn't change anything. The red button tells you when the currently loaded roll was put into the camera. The The grey one lets you choose how you want the date to look or if you just want it to be turned off, and the 3 little circles are for adjusting the date and time. From there, on the bottom, we have the forced rewind button, and on top, we have the lovely red shutter button and the self-timer button. Then finally on the front, there's a multiple exposure button, a backlit compensation button in red, and the on and off switch, which is combined with a plastic softening filter. After putting the batteries in when I first bought it, I didn't know how to turn the camera on, which of course I know now, and at the time I didn't really like this way of turning a camera on or off, but now I appreciate it because it's intuitive enough, but it's not so easy to do, meaning that it won't accidentally happen in your camera bag and you won't end up wasting any film like I have with my EOS 3000. But as for the softening filter, I just don't get it. I just haven't liked it once. So if you have this camera or you've used plastic softening filters before, please let me know what I'm meant to do, because I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why it exists. Over the past 2 years, shooting with this camera has been quite lovely. It works exactly as I expected to. The auto exposure is great, the flash works in a pinch, and the autofocus is very reliable. Though it's not perfect, every now and then it does miss focus or the exposure is not exactly as I wanted it to be. But most of the time, honestly, I think those mistakes come down to user error, and those problems are quite rare with this camera, mostly because I put aside my ego and read through the manual, and of course it had information that helped me use the camera. Yeah. Now, the chunkiness of the Autoboy does sometimes get in the way for me. For days or walks where I don't feel like carrying a bag with me, it's just that little bit too big, and sometimes I do wish it was smaller, but as I said earlier on in the video, that's the compromise of the twin lens feature, and ultimately I enjoy the twin lens feature much more than I am bothered by the size of this camera. It's a well-built camera that I take with me everywhere I go. It's even come with me for trips to the beach, where of course I've had to avoid getting it sandy or wet, but still, it's just as fine as the day I bought it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video about a camera that was made in the mid-80s that's definitely no longer in production, and really there's no guarantee that you'll come across one of these cameras anytime soon. Though bear in mind, Canon did make 45 different cameras in the Autoboy series, and they're all around the world waiting for you to perhaps try them out. And because Canon has made so many of these cameras, they're out there for reasonable prices. It's different wherever you are in the world because that's how film photography is. But just search around and you should be able to find something. I bought mine for 5,400 yen, which for the pictures that I've captured over the past 2 years with this camera isn't much of a price tag. In the end, whilst quality is as important as ever and you definitely don't want to shoot on a potato, what a point and shoot is all about is pointing and shooting and having fun with photography. And the Autoboy Telly, as well as the other cameras from the Autoboy series, are just fun. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, thumbs up the notification bell and subscribe to the video. You know how YouTube works. Genuinely, please do like the video and comment down below and engage. It's good for the channel, but it's also fun to do. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one where I'm going to talk about cameras, probably.